I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at 1705. Looking at the West after World War One. Some of the key objectives we're looking at today will be how Western society and culture changed after World War One. We'll be identifying the major contributions of scientists such as Marie Curie and Albert Einstein, summarize the domestic and foreign policy issues that Western democracies faced after World War One. We'll describe how the global depression began and its spread, and we'll explain the responses of Great Britain, France, and the United States to the Great Depression. One, what were some of the new technological innovations that were developed after World War One, and how did they impact the Western world? Innovations is such as the affordable automobile that was developed by Henry Ford. This improved society, gave people more flexibility. They were able to travel more, link people together, and improved all sorts of different secondary industries within society, including service stations and hotels and rubber and metal industries. All these different things kind of improved. Other improvements included more modern telephones, motion pictures, radio. This helped to create a mass culture and bring people around the world closer than ever before. Number two, how do the flappers symbolize women's emancipation during the Jazz Age? This showed that many women felt free enough to do things that they might have felt restricted to do in the past. They wanted to live a more exciting and fulfilling life. They kind of overturned the traditional way of looking at the stereotypical woman. Why were Curie's and Einstein's theories unsettling to the general public? They seemed to reinforce the sense of old certainties falling apart and a universe that seemed beyond human understanding. Many people back then and even today, they're fearful of the unknown. A lot of people like the security and the sense of knowing what to expect and what might happen. And with the more advanced sciences, you did not necessarily know what would be next. Okay, question number 4. Identify the major domestic foreign economic policies of Great Britain, France, and the United States. In Great Britain here in the 1920s, the Conservative Party dominated. The Irish Free State was established in 1922. Foreign policy was a little softer treatment of Germany, worked towards international peace. Economics, unemployment, labor unrest, and debt to the United States remained for the British. France, they were ruled by a series of coalition governments, meaning it was very difficult to get one party rule or leadership in their country. They had this kind of hardline approach towards the Germans. They had blamed the Germans for a lot of different violent activities and warfare against their country in the past many decades. They wanted to punish the Germans. They built the Maginot Line. This is a line of heavily defended forts that kind of operated along the French and German border. And they too wanted international peace. The French, they recovered a little faster than did the British. They were helped by reparations, and also they owed debt to the United States of America. In the United States, we had the Red Scare. Red Scare was the fear that communism was going to spread. We had seen the Russian Revolution previously, and there was some fear that communism could spread to the United States of America. We were working with other nations for peace, but we did not join the League of Nations, so there's still a kind of an isolationist attitude in the United States. I'm going to add that in there. Economically, the United States became a lead economic power during this period of time as well, so we're seeing a lot of different changes as we move forward. 5, compare and contrast the unrest in Great Britain, France, and the United States during the 1920s. Great Britain and France both had political disagreements between different political parties. In the United States, was, as we mentioned to you a moment ago, was the Red Scare, this fear that the communists would spread to the United States. And they're kind of the fear of the spread of communism would be kind of a dominant fear in the United States for some time. Six, what was one of the causes of social unrest and the popularization of radical ideas in the West? Well, one of the things that always fuels, I guess, unrest in any country would be economic uncertainty. If you're struggling economically, that usually leads to some uncertainty in the country. Vets, they were returning from the war looking for work. And many areas throughout Europe in particular were devastated because of the war itself. We had mentioned before that we had the Maginot Line there that was built in France. So why did the French build the Maginot Line? They built the fortifications along the border with Germany in an effort to prevent future invasions by the Germans. If you look at the red line there, the strongest of the fortifications took place directly across the French and German border along this region here. And as you move towards the shared border with Belgium, there was either little or no fortifications there. Foreshadowing with that particular statement. 8, how did the British government feel about the conditions set out in the Treaty of Versailles? The British leaders wanted to relax the harsh treatment of the Germans. They felt like the Germans, who had been just an ally of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and came in aid of their allies, should not necessarily have received as much blame for the war. They feared that France and the Soviet Union would become too powerful if Germany became too weak. They wanted kind of a balance of power in Europe. Nine, what was one of the weaknesses of the League of Nations? The League was powerless to stop aggression and had no way to enforce treaties that were signed. Unlike the United Nations later on in history, the United Nations had and does have still today the United Nations peacekeeping force, and the League of Nations did not have a fighting force, so if they made a declaration, they had to hope that somebody would comply. They had no means of enforcing it. We had an automatic numbering error there that I had to correct there midstream. My apologies. So looking at number 10, describe the economic condition of Great Britain after World War I. Britain lost overseas trade. They were deeply in debt. They had outdated factories. They suffered severe unemployment. There was a lot of worker unrest and strikes throughout Great Britain. How did the United States aid the economic recovery in Europe after World War I? The United States contributed loans and investments to aid European recovery. We're going to look more detail in the future at the Dawes Plan, which was a plan where we actually gave money and aid to the Germans, and the Germans would take the money from the United States and pay back reparations to the British and the French in hopes of stimulating the world economy. How did the post-war economic recovery differ in Britain and France? Well, Great Britain was deeply in debt. Factories were out of date. Unemployment was severe. There was frequent strikes. France made a more rapid recovery, but it experienced economic swings. My apologies if I was repetitive there. 13, the Great Depression. Explain how the fall in demand for raw materials and agricultural products helped to contribute to the Great Depression. Well, any economy is based on the basic premise of supply and demand. If the supply is really high and the demand is really low, then prices collapse and the economy goes down. If demand is high, and regardless of the supply, if demand remains high, you're going to see an increasing level of prices there. So as demand skyrocketed during World War I, but fell after the war, the low demand negatively impacted farmers, miners, and other suppliers for raw materials, and because they earned less, bought less, and output slowed down, did not slow down right away. We had overproduction of goods in factories, which is a contributing cause to the Great Depression. 14, how did the beginning of the Great Depression in the United States impact world markets? Well, the U.S. economy is part of an international network of trade and finance. separate these into two notes for us. As the U.S. economy faltered, the economics of the world relied on that as well. '15 was the New Deal successful? Partially so. It was unable to end the Great Depression, but it did ease the Depression's effects on millions of Americans. The New Deal was passed by Franklin Roosevelt. This was a series of comprehensive programs to kind of reform and rebuild the American economy. 16, how did the British government respond to the Great Depression? The Brits set up a coalition government made of leaders from all three major political parties. The government provided unemployment benefits, but failed to take decisive action to improve the economy. 17, how did the Federal Reserve Board of the United States contribute to the outbreak of the Great Depression? When the Federal Reserve Board raised interest rates, people bought less and invested less, which led to a decline in the economy. And then finally, the lesson reflection, how did the Great Depression and poor economic conditions impact governments around the world? This led to unrest and instability and calls for dramatic change around the globe. This led Adolf Hitler to taking power in Germany in 1933, during the early part of the Great Depression. Other governments felt like they were on the brink of revolution. And revolution occurs when citizens are desperate and the economy of the planet is suffering. It makes revolution and change in government much more likely. Until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.